The second crutch snapped like a gunshot. That sharp crack split the air of the wet campus parking lot, cutting right through the sound of the Seattle rain. And Brody Vance did not even flinch. He just dropped the two broken pieces of carbon fiber into the puddle at Chloe Miller's feet the way you might toss an empty soda can into the trash. Like it meant nothing. Like she meant nothing. Chloe sank lower against the cold, soaked asphalt, her fingers pressing hard into the gravel, her whole body bracing against the freezing Pacific Northwest rain that had been falling for 3 days straight. They destroyed my crutches. Her voice cracked on those words, not from weakness, from disbelief. Because those crutches were not just medical equipment. They were 8 months of her life. 8 months of late-night grocery store shifts, of counting every single dollar, of saying no to coffee and no to dinner out and no to everything that felt like a luxury. She had saved for those specific crutches because they did not hurt her hands. Because they let her walk across campus without feeling like the whole world was watching a broken girl try to keep up. And now they were trash in a puddle. Brody's friends, Tyler and Marcus, stood back under the concrete awning of the engineering building, laughing like they were watching a funny clip on their phones. To them, this was entertainment. That was all Chloe Miller ever was to boys like that. A joke, a video, content. Brody kept his phone angled down toward her, recording his expression somewhere between bored and amused. His family's name was literally carved in stone above the university library doors. For young men raised like Brody Vance, the world did not have rules, it had suggestions. A few students passed on the far sidewalk, heads ducked against the wind. They glanced over. They saw Brody holding the phone. They saw Chloe on the wet ground, and then one by one they looked away. Not one person stopped. It was that silence that finally made Chloe's throat tighten, and then the rumble came. Low, steady. Not aggressive, just deep and mechanical, vibrating right up through the concrete and into her bones. A single black motorcycle pulled to the curb. The rider cut the engine, kicked the stand down, and stepped off without rushing a single movement. He was an older man, probably late 50s, with silver hair tucked under a worn cap and a heavy leather vest that carried the Hells Angels patch on the back. His face was weathered and still, and his eyes were completely calm. He walked right past Brody as if the boy did not exist and knelt down in the mud next to Chloe. "Take it easy," he said. His voice was low and rough, the voice of a man who had seen the world do its worst and kept riding anyway. "Do not try to move that leg yet." He placed one large, calloused hand behind her shoulder, steady as a wall, giving her just enough support to lean back without sliding further into the water. "They broke them," Chloe whispered. "I saved for 8 months." The man looked at the shattered carbon fiber for a long, quiet moment. His jaw moved slightly. Then he turned his head and looked at Brody Vance. It was not a movie stare. There was no theatrical anger, no performance of toughness. It was simply a cold, heavy gaze that made every last trace of Brody's smirk disappear in an instant. "Hey, we were just messing around," Brody said, his voice dropping a full octave, all the confidence draining out of it like water from a cracked cup. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a fat leather wallet. "Look, I got cash. $300. That is more than enough for some plastic replacements." He tossed the bills toward the mud. The biker stood up slowly. He was broad-shouldered and solid, and when he stood, he blocked the light from the street lamp. "Pick up the money," the older man said quietly. Brody hesitated, glancing back at his friends, but Tyler and Marcus were already backing away toward the library doors. "I said pick it up." That second time, there was something in the man's voice that left no room for debate. Brody bent down his face, turning red, as he peeled the wet cash out of the puddle. The biker did not look at him again. He pulled out a black phone from his vest and took 2 quiet photographs, one of Brody's face, one of the broken crutches in the mud. Then he looked down at Chloe. "My name is Luke," he said gently. "Folks call me Ghost. Tomorrow morning, Chloe, you will not be standing out here by yourself. I promise you that." And without any more words, without any complaint about the mud or his clothes, he lifted her carefully and carried her to a large white pickup truck parked behind his bike. He set her gently into the warm passenger seat. Then he walked back, picked up both halves of her broken crutches from the puddle, and placed them in the truck bed as carefully as if they were made of glass. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Chloe looked back through the rain-streaked window. Brody Vance was still standing under the street lamp staring at his phone, but he was not laughing anymore. In the rain, he looked very small. The heater in Luke's truck hummed softly, pushing warm air against Chloe's frozen legs. Outside, the Seattle rain swept across the highway in long gray curtains, blurring the taillights ahead. Luke drove with both hands easy on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road. He did not ask 100 questions. He did not tell her everything was going to be okay. He just drove. There was a comfort in that silence, the kind of quiet that only came from people who had lived enough life to know that sometimes words were the wrong tool entirely. At the small blue house at the end of the block, Sarah Miller stood in the hallway, still wearing her dark blue hospital scrubs, her face going pale the moment she saw her daughter being carried through the front door by a man covered in leather and road miles. What happened? Oh God, Chloe, what happened? She is all right, ma'am. Luke's boots thudded softly on the hardwood floor as he set Chloe down on the worn fabric sofa, making sure her bad leg was resting straight. Some boys at the school broke her crutches. Sarah dropped to her knees beside the couch, her hands shaking as she touched her daughter's cold face. The custom ones, the ones you worked all summer for. Chloe looked away. She bit her lower lip until it turned white. She had spent 4 years building walls around the reality of her disability, brick by brick, trying to keep her mother from carrying that weight on top of everything else. The lost husband, the double shifts, the mortgage, and now here was another mess, another burden. Luke stood near the door, quietly dripping rainwater onto the welcome mat. His eyes drifted around the small living room and settled on a faded photograph on the mantelpiece. A younger man in a military uniform standing next to a little girl with a bright gap-toothed smile. Your husband, Luke, asked softly. He passed away 4 years ago. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Car accident. Chloe was in the passenger seat. Luke stared at that photograph for a long moment. A small muscle moved in his jaw beneath his silver beard. He reached into his vest, pulled out a clean white handkerchief, and handed it to Sarah without a word. Then he pointed toward the kitchen. I am going to make some tea, he said as naturally as if he had lived there for years. You sit with her. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 mugs and settled into the old wooden rocking chair across from the couch. The chair groaned quietly under his weight. He looked at Chloe for a long moment, the kind of look that saw through pretending. Those boys, he said. It was not the first time, was it? It was not a question. Chloe wrapped both hands around the warm mug. She shook her head. Brody Vance had been doing it for 3 months. Videos of her struggling on the icy library stairs in winter. A nickname he had made up and spread through the whole athletic department. The broken engineer. She had never reported it. Because Brody's father practically owned the athletic building. Because nobody would have listened. Luke nodded slowly, staring into his tea. 30 years ago, he said, his voice dropping into a low, steady rhythm, I had a younger brother named Tommy. Tommy enlisted right out of high school, came back from his first overseas deployment without his left arm and with shrapnel embedded so deep in his spine the surgeons could not get it all out. The rocking chair creaked in the silence. The government issued him one of those old, heavy wheelchairs, the kind with wheels that stuck and metal handles that tore the skin off your palms. He was 22 years old. He used to sit in our mother's kitchen staring at the floor because he could not get to the bathroom by himself. Our family did not have money for the good equipment, the custom stuff, so I used to carry him up the stairs every single night. Luke paused. He passed when he was 26. Infection complications. And for 26 years since then, I have been riding these roads carrying a debt I never got to pay back to him. He stood up slowly and crossed to the coffee table. He set a small business card next to Chloe's mug. You told me on the ride over that you want to build affordable mobility systems, Luke said, his voice going firm and steady as iron rails. Do not ever let some rich kid in a nice jacket make you feel like that dream is too small. You hear me? Chloe felt a tear slip down her cheek. She nodded. I hear you. I will be back at dawn, Luke said, pulling his cap low over his eyes. Get some rest, kiddo. An hour later, Luke sat alone at the wooden table in his small cottage on the edge of the city. The rain ticked against the window pane. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet, was a Polaroid of Tommy in his hospital bed, young and smiling, one sleeve pinned flat where his arm used to be. Luke opened a private encrypted messaging channel used by senior members of the Hells Angels across the state of Washington. His thumbs moved slowly across the screen. He wrote, "This is Ghost. Today at the Seattle University Quad, 3 wealthy kids snapped a disabled student's crutches over a knee. They filmed her lying in the mud and laughed. The crowd walked past, and not one person stopped. This girl is the daughter of a fallen veteran. She is working to build equipment to help other veterans. Tomorrow they plan to suspend her to silence her. I need brothers who still believe in honor. Come with respect, not weapons. Just show up." Seattle University, 6 in the morning. He set the phone face down on the table. Within 2 minutes it began to buzz. Then again, and again. The screen lit up the dark kitchen as notification after notification rolled in from Tacoma, from Spokane, from Olympia, from across the state line. The brothers were already rolling. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Chloe moved across the wet campus quad on the borrowed silver aluminum hospital crutches that dug into her armpits with every step. They were 2 inches too tall, forcing her shoulders up in a constant, painful shrug. The metal tubes clicked loudly against the concrete, a sound that followed her like a second shadow. She kept her eyes flat on the path. She told herself she only needed to make it to the structural engineering lab, slide into the back row, disappear into her equations. She never made it. A campus security officer stepped into her path just outside the lecture hall. He did not look her in the eye. He just handed her a small folded piece of paper. A formal summons from the office of the Dean of Students, the word immediate stamped across the top in red ink. When Chloe pushed open the heavy oak door of the administration suite, the room went completely quiet. She expected to face Dean Patricia Wren alone. Instead, a packed conference room looked back at her. Brody Vance sat at the long mahogany table in a pressed suit, leaning back like he owned the chair and everything in it, tapping a silver pen against his knee. Beside him sat his father, Vance Morgan, a silver-templed man in a tailored coat that cost more than Chloe's mother made in 2 months. Flanking them were 2 sharp-eyed corporate attorneys. "Sit down, Miss Miller." Dean Wren's voice was tight and stripped of all its usual warmth. Chloe sat. Her borrowed crutches clattered against the table leg. One of the attorneys stood sliding a glossy tablet to the center of the table. On the screen was a paused video, the exact footage Marcus had recorded in the rain. Miss Miller said the attorney, his voice as smooth as polished marble, "We are here today to address a serious violation of the university's code of conduct. Specifically, an orchestrated campaign of extortion and digital harassment targeting my client, Brody Vance." Chloe blinked. A cold chill dropped straight into her stomach. "He snapped my crutches while I was on the ground." What the video actually shows, the attorney interrupted his voice, cutting through hers like a blade, is a brief out-of-context interaction. "We have formal statements from 2 eyewitnesses confirming that you initiated a confrontation, that you tripped over your own equipment, and that the crutches, which were already structurally compromised, broke due to your own negligence. That is a lie." Chloe's hands tightened around the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. "Dean, Wren, you know me. I have been on this campus for 3 years. There were dozens of students who saw what happened." Then Vance Morgan leaned forward. He rested his gold-ringed hands flat on the mahogany table with the unhurried confidence of a man who had bought and sold entire city blocks before breakfast. "Let us be completely honest, Miss Miller," he said. "My family has donated $6 million to this institution over the last 5 years. The very roof over your head was funded by my company. My son has a spotless record, an athletic scholarship, and a professional career ahead of him. I will not allow his name to be damaged by a student looking for a financial handout." He turned his gaze to Dean Wren. If this story reaches any local news outlet, Morgan Construction will immediately freeze all funding for the new medical science wing. And our legal team will file a $20 million defamation suit against this university before sundown today. Dean Wren swallowed. Her hands were clasped so tightly her fingers had gone pale. Chloe Dean Wren said, refusing to lift her eyes from the desk. Given the conflicting testimony and the severity of these allegations, effective immediately, you are placed on an emergency suspension for the remainder of the academic semester. Your access to the engineering labs is revoked. You are required to vacate your student housing within 48 hours. The room tilted. Chloe looked across the table at Brody Vance. He did not say anything. He just let the smallest, slowest smirk settle across his face. He had won. The money had won. The truth did not matter. "We are finished here," Vance Morgan said, rising and buttoning his coat. "Make sure she signs the non-disclosure agreement before she leaves, Patricia. I do not want to see her on this campus again." Chloe stood. Her borrowed crutches trembled under her weight. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to break free. But she refused to let a single tear fall in front of these men. She grabbed her crutches, she turned her back on the room, and she walked out into the long, empty corridor. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her. She leaned against the cold stone wall. Her breath came in ragged, suffocating waves. She was completely alone. Her scholarship was gone. Her degree was gone. The world had just told her that being poor and disabled meant you did not get to have a future. She looked out the high hallway window at the courtyard below. The clock on the wall read 5 minutes to 6 in the morning. The cardboard boxes Chloe found behind the grocery store smelled of dust and old produce. She sat on the edge of her mattress, her borrowed crutches leaning against the nightstand like two metallic sentinels marking her defeat. 48 hours. That was all she had been given to erase 3 years of her life. Her hand-drawn blueprints, her modular brace designs, her senior seminar projects. She dropped them all into the bottom of a box, one by one, with a hollow thud that seemed too loud for the small room. Her mother stood in the doorway, eyes red and hollow. "We can fight this, Chloe. We can find a legal aid attorney downtown." With what Mom Chloe did not look up. A tear dropped onto her blueprint paper. Vance Morgan has more lawyers in his lobby than this entire city has public defenders. If we fight them, they will take this house. They will take everything you have left. She wrapped the photograph of her father carefully in a wool sweater and placed it at the top of the box. At 5 o'clock in the morning, 3 slow, rhythmic knocks sounded at the front door. Luke stood on the porch in the gray mist, his leather vest dark with road dust, his boots caked with fresh grime from miles ridden through the night. "Morning, ma'am." He nodded to Sarah and walked straight into the living room. He looked at Chloe's tear-stained face. He looked at the open boxes. His jaw tightened into a hard, still line. "Get your coat, Chloe." "I cannot go back there, Luke. They suspended me." "If campus security finds me on the grounds, they will call the city police. I will have a criminal record." Luke did not argue. He did not offer a speech. He walked over, picked up her winter jacket from the sofa and held it open. "They told you that because they wanted you to hide in this room," he said, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a calm, absolute certainty that left no space for doubt. "They want you to believe the world is small enough to fit inside their wallet." He held her gaze for one long moment. "It is not. Put your coat on. We are going to school." There was something in his presence, that quiet, immovable steadiness that made it impossible to say no. Chloe slipped into her jacket, grabbed her crutches, and followed him out into the cold morning air. The white pickup truck pulled onto the university campus at exactly 15 minutes before 6. The quad was largely empty. A few facilities workers swept wet leaves near the library in the gray dawn light. Luke did not park in the student lot. He pulled the truck right up onto the concrete curb of the administration building, stopping directly in front of the wide stone steps. A moment later, a sleek black town car pulled up on the opposite side of the drive. The door opened, and Vance Morgan stepped out flanked by his attorneys. Brody followed close behind, his phone already in his hand, scrolling through social media with a bored expression, as if this were just another unremarkable Tuesday. Vance Morgan stopped on the steps. He spotted Luke's truck immediately. "I thought the university made itself clear," Morgan said, his voice carrying that cold, dismissive ring of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. "If you do not remove this vehicle in 60 seconds, my attorneys will have the city marshal impound it." Luke did not move. He leaned back against the hood of the truck, arms crossed over his leather vest, watching Morgan with the calm, unhurried expression of a man who had faced far worse things than expensive lawyers. "The 60 seconds are for you," Morgan Luke said quietly. Brody let out a short laugh from behind his father. "Look around, old man. It is 6 in the morning. You are all alone out here." The words had barely left his mouth when the air changed. It started as a vibration. Barely noticeable at first, a subtle trembling in the puddles along the curb. Then it deepened into a low, rolling rumble from somewhere beyond the tree line at the eastern edge of the campus. A sound too steady for thunder, too rhythmic for the wind. The facilities workers near the library stopped sweeping. They turned toward the sound. The rumble grew. It swelled. It resolved into a roar of mechanical energy so deep and so wide it shook the glass in the administration building windows. Rounding the curve of University Avenue, riding in a formation so precise it looked rehearsed, came the motorcycles. Front headlights cut through the gray morning mist like a swarm of silver eyes. Chrome and dark leather stretched as far back as the eye could follow, two abreast, a massive wave of iron rolling without hesitation straight toward the university quad. At the front rode a broad-shouldered man with a long gray beard, his vest bearing the heavy chapter insignia of the Tacoma crew. Behind him came riders from Spokane, from Olympia, from Everett. Men and women, their engines producing a thunderous chorus that completely drowned out the Seattle wind. Vance Morgan's attorneys froze on the steps. Brody's phone dropped from his fingers and clattered unnoticed on the stone. His face had gone ash gray. 70 Hells Angels rolled into the parking lot, encircling the administration building like a ring of iron. One by one, 70 engines cut out in perfect unison. The sudden silence rolled across the campus like a physical thing. Every voice stayed low. Every engine stayed quiet. Out of pure, deliberate respect. 70 men and women swung off their motorcycles in slow, unhurried movements. Heavy boots thudded against wet concrete. Hands open and empty. No weapons, no threats, just presence. They walked forward with a calm, unstoppable cadence and formed a massive semicircle at the base of the administration building steps, placing themselves quietly between Vance Morgan and the rest of the world. It was a wall of solidarity, a jury of strangers who had ridden through the night because honor still meant something. Luke walked to the passenger side of his truck. He opened the door. He offered Chloe his hand. He took it, her fingers cold against his calloused palm. She swung herself down onto her borrowed crutches, her heart pounding, and looked out at the rows of leather-clad riders standing absolutely still in the gray morning light. For 3 years, she had felt invisible on this campus, a ghost navigating the edges of a world built for people with money. But today, 70 people were looking directly at her, and in their eyes was something she had almost forgotten how to recognize: respect. Windows across the quad slid open. Students heading to early lectures stopped dead on the walkways, pulling out their phones. Within 3 minutes, nearly 200 people had gathered along the perimeter, cameras raised. What is the meaning this? Vance Morgan's voice cracked slightly, the smooth corporate composure finally starting to fracture. He looked at the circle of riders, his face darkening to a deep, angry crimson. "Patricia, call campus security immediately. This is criminal trespassing. This is a riot." Dean Patricia Wren stepped out of the oak doors, her face pale as chalk as she took in the sight of 70 Hells Angels occupying her courtyard. She opened her mouth. Luke stepped forward. "There is no riot here, Dean Wren," he said. His rough voice carried effortlessly over the damp morning air, without him raising it even slightly. Every person here is standing on public ground within their rights, making no threats to anyone. We are here as members of the public witnessing a public matter. This is an administrative disciplinary proceeding, the lead attorney stammered, his fingers fumbling with his silk tie. The university has already rendered its ruling. Your presence here changes nothing. The eyewitness statements are a lie. The voice came from the edge of the student crowd. A young woman named Elena stepped forward, her phone extended, her hand trembling slightly with adrenaline. She was a junior in Chloe's structural mechanics class, a girl Chloe had never spoken to before. "I have the unedited video," Elena said, her voice steady despite the shaking in her hand. She looked directly at Brody. "Marcus Reed posted the full 60-second clip to our floor's private group chat on Thursday night, before your father's attorneys made him delete it. I screen recorded the whole thing because it made me sick. It clearly shows Brody grabbing Chloe's right crutch, wrenching it away from her and laughing while she fell into the mud. There was no confrontation. She was just trying to go home." The crowd erupted into a collective gasp. Dozens of phones swung instantly toward Brody Vance. His arrogant posture had evaporated, completely replaced by a wide-eyed twitching panic as he looked at his father. "Delete that immediately," Vance Morgan hissed. "You will not expel anyone, Morgan." A broad-shouldered Red Rider named Big Tom walked up beside Luke. He had thick forearms and a gray beard, and he looked at Vance Morgan with absolute, undisguised disgust. "My daughter lost her leg in an accident 6 years ago," Big Tom said. "I know exactly what it looks like when a coward with money tries to bury the truth under a pile of cash. Every camera on this campus is pointed at your son's face right now. The truth is out, and you cannot buy enough advertising space to hide it." Luke turned to Dean Wren. She was staring at Elena's phone, watching the unedited footage play in the gray morning light. Her face had gone pale and still. "The decision is yours," Patricia Luke said. "You can protect the $6 million in corporate donations, or you can protect the dignity of a student who actually earned her place here. But whichever you choose, you are going to make that choice right out here in the open, where the whole city can see you." Dean Wren looked at Vance Morgan, then at the rows of silent riders, then at Chloe standing straight on her heavy aluminum crutches, her chin held high. The administrative mask cracked. "Mr. Morgan Dean Wren said," and her voice dropped into a register that left no room for negotiation. "Your legal counsel assured me no such footage existed. They lied to my office." "Patricia, listen to me," Vance Morgan began. "No, you listen to me, Vance." Dean Wren interrupted him with a cold, clean authority that left his attorney speechless. "Your son's suspension will be processed effective immediately. Miss Miller's emergency suspension is canceled as of this moment. Your corporate legal team has exactly 10 minutes to leave my campus before security escorts them off the property. And the next time your attorneys present manufactured evidence to this office, I will be contacting the State Bar Association." A massive rolling cheer erupted from the crowd of students, echoing off the brick walls of the library. Among the 70 riders there was no cheering. They simply stood still as stone and watched as Vance Morgan, his attorneys, and a pale and trembling Brody Vance retreated back down the steps. Their carefully built empire of influence crumbling in the early morning light before the sun had even fully cleared the Seattle skyline. The official disciplinary hearing lasted nearly 3 hours. But for Brody Vance, the verdict had been written the moment 70 motorcycles lined the quad. With Elena's unedited video presented as undeniable evidence, the university board moved with a swift, merciless precision that no amount of corporate money could stop. Brody Vance was expelled. His athletic scholarship permanently revoked. His name removed from every team roster. But the consequences extended well beyond the campus. The video had gone viral across multiple local news networks by mid-morning. The city prosecutor's office stepped in, filing charges of misdemeanor assault and criminal destruction of property. To avoid incarceration, his father's attorneys negotiated a plea deal. The sentence was 500 hours of mandatory community service at the Seattle Veterans Rehabilitation and Mobility Center. For a young man who had spent his entire life in air-conditioned stadium suites and luxury vehicles, the reality of that first morning hit like a wall. Brody stood in the damp, fluorescent-lit basement of the Veteran Center, wearing a plain gray jumpsuit instead of his custom varsity jacket. His hands, which had only ever gripped footballs, were already blistering from scrubbing rust off old iron wheelchair frames. "You are late, Vance." The voice came from the shadow of the workshop. An older man named Sergeant Miller, a towering veteran with a prosthetic left arm and a face carved by decades of hard service, walked out holding a heavy wooden crate filled with bent aluminum tubes. "I had to take the city bus," Brody muttered, looking at his worn sneakers. "It took 40 minutes. "I do not care if you crawled here on your hands," Sergeant Miller said, his voice flat and hard as pavement. "Around here, we respect time. Because the people using this equipment do not have any to waste, you see those crates over there? Manual wheelchairs and aluminum braces from the old state hospital? They need to be fully disassembled, cleaned, and re-greased by 5 o'clock today. Get to work." For the first 2 weeks, Brody resisted. He moved slowly, complained under his breath, waited for his father to send a lawyer and a check to make this all disappear. No rescue came. Every single day, he had to look at what his actions meant in the real world. He watched veterans men who had given their bodies for their country struggle down corridors because their equipment was clunky and ill-fitting and painful. He watched it and could not look away. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Brody was dragging a heavy crate of iron wheel hubs across the floor when he stopped outside the main physical therapy room. Through the glass, he saw an older veteran named Thomas, a man who had lost his leg in a helicopter crash decades ago, trying to take a few steps on a pair of heavy steel crutches. Thomas's face was contorted in pain as the unpadded metal cuffs rubbed his wrists raw. Brody froze, the sound of that metal clicking against the linoleum. The sight of Thomas's face. It was a direct, undeniable mirror of what he had done to Chloe Miller in that parking lot. And for the first time in 22 years of living inside a bubble of privilege and arrogance, Brody Vance finally saw it clearly. His careless cruelty did not just happen in a parking lot for a couple of minutes. It echoed. It kept echoing. In the lives of real people long after the video stopped playing and the comments stopped loading. He sat down on his work stool in the dark basement, surrounded by the smell of grease and old metal. He put his face in his calloused hands. He did not sleep that night. For the next 3 days, the memory of Chloe's tear-stained face in the rain stayed with him. Heavy and constant, the kind of shame that money cannot touch. 6 months passed in a blur of composite materials, late-night blueprints, and sawdust. The small garage behind Luke's cottage had been converted into a working engineering workshop. It was funded by small donations from across Washington state and by the constant, steady support of the Hells Angels brothers who showed up with their hands ready to help build whatever Chloe needed. Chloe sat at the wooden workbench, her new dark blue custom crutches resting beside her chair as she tightened the final locking pin on a sleek composite leg brace. This was the first official production run of the Miller-Harrison mobility system. Modular, lightweight, built from durable, low-cost composite materials, designed so that a person could adjust the fit by up to 4 inches as they healed or grew without ever having to replace the whole unit. "That is the last one for the morning batch," Luke said, walking in with 2 large wooden shipping crates. He looked down at the row of 12 beautifully crafted crutches, and a quiet, rare smile broke through his silver beard. "The van from the Veterans Center arrives at 11. You ready to head over?" Chloe traced the small winged emblem etched into the blue aluminum frame. "Ready. Let us go see if they work in the real world." When Luke's truck pulled into the loading dock of the Veterans Rehabilitation Center, the air was crisp and carrying the light smell of rain. Chloe moved with a steady, confident rhythm on her new crutches, her posture straight and proud. She followed Luke into the large basement workshop. Standing near a heavy industrial cleaning tub, his back turned to them, was a young man scraping rust off an old steel wheelchair frame. Short hair, thinned-out shoulders, gray jumpsuit covered in grease stains. As the metal door clicked shut, the young man turned around. It was Brody Vance. Chloe's hands tightened slightly on her grips. She had not seen him since the morning on the quad 6 months ago. The arrogant football star who had filmed her lying in the mud was completely gone. In his place stood a young man with a face lined by genuine exhaustion, his hands covered in dark grease and blisters from heavy labor. Brody's eyes went wide when he saw her. He looked at her new crutches. Then, at the crate of blue mobility equipment Luke was setting on the table. His face flushed a deep red, but this time he did not look away in anger. He looked down at his own calloused hands. A heavy silence filled the workshop. Vance Sergeant Miller called from the office doorway. "Stop scrubbing for a minute. Miss Miller and Mr. Harrison just brought in the first delivery of the new modular braces. I want you to help them unload." Brody wiped his greasy hands on a rag. He walked slowly to the table and stopped exactly 3 feet from Chloe. Luke stood just behind her, his massive frame absolutely still, his dark eyes watching every movement Brody made with a quiet, dangerous steadiness. Brody did not offer an excuse. He did not smirk. Instead, he did something that left the entire room in silence. Brody Vance looked directly into Chloe's eyes, and then he slowly bowed his head. His shoulders dropped. A gesture of complete and genuine humility. "I am sorry, Chloe Brody," said his voice low and trembling, stripped bare of every trace of the pride she had once known from him. "I know 1,000 apologies cannot fix what I did to you in that parking lot. I know I destroyed something that took you 8 months of your life to save for. I was a coward. I treated you like you were not even a real person. Just to get clicks on a screen." He reached into his jumpsuit pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather ledger. He set it on the table beside the new crutches. "I have been keeping track of every hour I work here. My father cut me off completely. I live in a tiny room near the industrial docks, and I work the night shift at a shipping warehouse to cover rent. But I do not want his money to fix what I broke. I have saved $400 from my own wages over the past 3 months. It is all in this ledger. I want to give it to your foundation." He paused. His eyes were wet. "And if you will let me, when my 500 hours of mandatory service are finished next week, I want to keep volunteering at your workshop. For free. On weekends. I want to help build these braces so that nobody else ever has to feel the pain I caused." Chloe looked at the ledger. Then she looked at his face. She could see the truth in his eyes. The raw, painful reality of a young man who had finally been forced to sit inside his own cruelty long enough for it to break him all the way down and rebuild him from scratch. This was not a scripted apology for a camera. This was a human being learning in the hardest possible way what respect actually meant. "The money goes into the materials fund for the veterans," Chloe said, her voice quiet and steady. "And as for the workshop, we start manufacturing every Saturday at 7 in the morning. If you are late even by 1 minute, Luke locks the gate. Are we clear?" Brody looked up. A tear cut a clean line through the grease on his cheek. A small, genuine flicker of relief crossed his face. He nodded. "I will be there at 6:30, I promise." Luke looked at Brody for a long, measuring moment. Then he reached out a large, tattooed hand and set it once on the young man's shoulder. Not a gesture of forgiveness, not yet, but an acknowledgement. The lesson had been learned, the price had been paid. And out of the mud of that rainy Thursday afternoon, something decent had finally begun to grow. The spring sky over Seattle cleared for the first time in weeks. Long, pale streaks of golden sunlight cut through the morning mist and fell across the main university stadium, packed with hundreds of graduating families, banners waving, cameras raised, the air full of the kind of joyful noise that belongs entirely to days like this one. Chloe Miller stood near the edge of the tunnel leading onto the grass field, smoothing down the fabric of her dark blue academic gown. Her mother Sarah stood right beside her, adjusting the yellow engineering sash around Chloe's neck with trembling, emotional fingers. "Your father would have been so proud," Sarah whispered, a warm tear slipping down her cheek. "He always knew you were going to build something incredible." "I did not build it alone, Mom." Chloe looked down at the crutches supporting her weight. They were nothing like the borrowed hospital aluminum from that dark morning. These were crafted from dark matte blue composite materials with custom molded silicone cuffs that fit her perfectly. Etched neatly into the side of the metal frame was the official name of her foundation. The Miller-Harrison Mobility System, the final production-ready model, already shipping to 3 major regional rehabilitation centers across the state of Washington. Next graduate, the University Marshal announced through the stadium speakers, Chloe Marie Miller, Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering. Chloe stepped forward into the bright, open sunlight. The crowd applauded as she made her way toward the center stage. She walked with an absolute, unhurried certainty. Every step was smooth and balanced and proud. She climbed the stairs without hesitation. She met the eyes of the crowd without flinching. She had spent 3 years trying to hide her struggle from the world. Today she was walking directly into the light, showing every person in that stadium that her difference was not a weakness. It was the very foundation of everything she had built. As the dean placed the leather-bound diploma in her hands, a low, deep rumble rolled over the outer walls of the stadium. Too deep for thunder, too steady for wind. It was the unmistakable mechanical roar of 70 V-twin engines firing in perfect unison just beyond the main stadium gates. The Hells Angels brothers had come back. They stayed outside, letting the ceremony continue undisturbed. They simply stood beside their bikes in the afternoon sun, their leather vests gleaming, their engines producing a powerful, rhythmic chorus that shook the concrete stands. It was their tribute, a wall of pure respect. A salute from 70 strangers who had once ridden through the night for a girl they had never met because honor still meant something in this world. When the ceremony ended and the crowd began to drift toward the exits, Chloe made her way through the dispersing families toward the outer gates. Standing at the front of the massive row of motorcycles was Luke, his gray cap pulled low, his heavy leather vest dark with road dust, arms crossed over his chest. Beside him stood Big Tom, and standing slightly to the side holding a small wooden box filled with new composite blueprint designs was Brody Vance, wearing his grease-stained workshop apron. Luke waited until Chloe reached the bottom step. "You did good out there, kiddo," Luke said, his rough voice cracking slightly on the last word. "We did good, Ghost," Chloe corrected quietly. And then she leaned forward and pulled the massive, road-worn biker into a warm, tight embrace. Her face pressed against the rough leather of his vest. The same solid, immovable shelter that had found her lying in the mud 12 months ago. Luke held on for a moment. Then he stepped back, slowly reaching into his inner vest pocket. He pulled out a small, faded Polaroid photograph. Tommy, in his old military hospital bed, young and smiling with everything he had left. Luke laid it gently into Chloe's hand, his fingers resting over hers for a long, quiet moment. "I have been carrying this picture for 26 years, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, just between the two of them. "Waiting to pay a debt I thought I owed to the dead. But looking at you today, and looking at the braces you built for those old men in the basement, I think Tommy's debt is finally settled. I want you to carry his picture in your workshop bag now, to remind you of why we never look away." Chloe looked down at Tommy's bright laughing eyes, then at the rows of 70 riders waiting quietly behind Luke in the afternoon light. Her throat tightened, but the feeling rising in her chest was not sadness. It was purpose, burning and clear and enormous. "What is next, Chloe?" Brody asked quietly from her side, his ledger in hand, his eyes full of a ready, focused respect that looked nothing like the boy she had once known. Chloe looked at the dark blue crutches in her hands, then out at the long open highway stretching beyond the campus gates. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, and a beautiful smile broke across her face as the 70 engines rose into one final, thunderous, joyful chorus. "We are just getting started." And as that thunderous rumble faded slowly into the Seattle horizon, it left behind something far greater than justice. It left reminder that when we refuse to look away from someone in need, we give them the strength to stand up and change the world. Thank you for listening to this journey on Heart Tales. If this story moved you, please subscribe and join our family. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a single act of kindness that completely changed the direction of someone's life? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And before you go, click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another deeply emotional story that will stay with you. Until next time, take care of each other.